The first signs that something was catastrophically wrong with Andreas Keller's body appeared on a cold February morning in Munich, exactly 19 days after his return from what he had described to his colleagues as a transformative business trip to Senegal that had exceeded all his professional and personal expectations. The 44-year-old civil engineer, known throughout the international development community for his methodical approach to infrastructure projects and his unwavering attention to safety protocols, stood before his bathroom mirror, watching in horror as dark patches of necrotic tissue spread across his chest and arms like some grotesque map of internal destruction that defied every medical explanation he could imagine. The putrid smell that emanated from his own body was unlike anything Andreas had encountered during his 20-year career, building water treatment facilities and sewage systems in some of the world's most challenging environments, a stench that seemed to originate from deep within his tissues and grow stronger each day, despite his desperate attempts to mask it with antiseptics and medical treatments recommended by doctors who were as baffled by his condition as he was terrified by its relentless progression. What made his deteriorating condition even more mystifying was that Andreas had returned from Senegal feeling healthier and more energetic than he had in years, reinvigorated by what he believed had been a successful romantic encounter with Aminata Diop, a sophisticated businesswoman who had shown him aspects of West African culture and intimacy that had made him forget the loneliness and disappointment that had plagued him since his divorce 18 months earlier. Their brief but intense relationship had seemed like a gift from fate, arriving just when he needed validation that he could still attract and please an intelligent, beautiful woman who appreciated both his professional expertise and his personal qualities. The systematic destruction of his body that began 3 weeks after his return to Germany suggested exposure to some exotic pathogen or toxin that European medicine was unprepared to identify or treat, though Andreas's memories of his time in Senegal provided no obvious explanation for how he might have contracted such a devastating condition. His work at the water treatment facility in Dakar had followed all standard safety protocols. His accommodations at the Hotel Teranga had been comfortable and clean, and his interactions with local officials and contractors had been conducted with the same professional caution that had protected him during similar projects across Africa and South America. The only unusual aspect of his Senegal trip had been his romantic involvement with Aminata, though their intimate encounters had seemed healthy and consensual, taking place in her elegant apartment overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, where she had prepared traditional meals and shared stories about her family's history in the textile trade that had made their connection feel authentic, meaningful, rather than merely physical or transactional. The progressive nature of Andreas's condition suggested deliberate poisoning rather than accidental exposure, though the delay between the suspected administration and the onset of symptoms created investigative challenges that would require international cooperation and expertise in both traditional African medicine and modern toxicology. Resolve. The sophistication of the poisoning technique indicated knowledge that went beyond casual criminal activity to suggest systematic targeting by individuals with specialized expertise in substances that could cause delayed but ultimately fatal consequences. The isolation that Andreas had experienced since his divorce made him an ideal target for criminals who specialized in exploiting lonely European men through romantic manipulation, combined with sophisticated chemical weapons that would cause death weeks or months after initial contact, making investigation nearly impossible and providing perfect alibis for the perpetrators who would be thousands of miles away when their victims finally succumbed to their injuries. The investigation that would eventually uncover the truth about Andreas's condition would reveal a criminal network that operated across West Africa, using traditional knowledge of plant-based toxins combined with modern romantic manipulation techniques to target successful foreign men who were vulnerable to emotional exploitation and whose deaths could be attributed to tropical diseases or natural causes, rather than recognized as systematic murder for financial gain. The forensic pathology that would be required to identify the exotic compounds destroying Andreas's body from within would challenge the capabilities of German medical science, while also requiring cooperation with African traditional medicine practitioners who understood the properties and effects of substances that had been used for centuries in ritual practices and criminal activities, but were unknown to European physicians and toxicologists. The international scope of the investigation that Andreas's case would eventually trigger would demonstrate both the global reach of modern criminal enterprises and the challenges faced by law enforcement agencies attempting to combat crimes that exploited cultural differences and traditional knowledge to create untraceable weapons that could defeat even sophisticated forensic investigation techniques. The medical mystery that Andreas Keller's condition presented to Munich's University Hospital began with his desperate visit to the emergency department on February 23rd, when the necrotic tissue damage had progressed to the point where conventional antiseptics and pain medications were no longer able to mask the severity of his deteriorating physical state. Dr. Elena Hartmann, the emergency physician who first examined Andreas, immediately recognized that his symptoms were unlike anything in standard medical literature, with tissue death patterns that suggested systematic poisoning by an unknown biological or chemical agent rather than any infectious disease or autoimmune condition she had previously encountered. The comprehensive blood tests that Dr. Hartmann ordered revealed the presence of multiple exotic compounds that were not found in any European pharmaceutical database, suggesting exposure to plant-based toxins or synthetic chemicals that had been specifically designed to avoid detection by standard medical screening procedures. The complexity of the toxin mixture and its sophisticated delivery mechanism indicated advanced knowledge of both traditional poisoning methods and modern pharmaceutical principles, creating a chemical weapon that was both untraceable and ultimately fatal without immediate intervention. The consultation with Dr. Ulrich Brandt, Munich's leading forensic pathologist, brought specialized expertise in toxicology and criminal poisoning cases to bear on Andreas's condition, though even Dr. Brandt's extensive experience with exotic poisons and deliberate contamination had not prepared him for the sophistication of the substances that were systematically destroying Andreas's body from within, while leaving his mental faculties terrifyingly intact to witness every stage of his physical deterioration. The investigation into Andreas's recent travel history revealed his 3-week assignment in Senegal, working on a European Union-funded water treatment project, though his professional activities and accommodations provided no obvious explanation for exposure to the exotic toxins that were causing his condition. The systematic nature of his poisoning and the delayed onset of symptoms suggested deliberate administration by someone with intimate access to his food, drink, or personal belongings during his time in Dakar. The communication with Andreas about his experiences in Senegal was complicated by his obvious emotional attachment to his memories of Aminata Diop, whose romantic involvement with him had been the highlight of his trip and who he was reluctant to consider as a potential source of his current medical crisis. His detailed descriptions of their relationship revealed a pattern of behavior that was consistent with sophisticated romantic manipulation designed to create emotional dependency while providing opportunities for the covert administration of toxic substances. Sabine Keller's involvement in her ex-husband's medical crisis grew out of their daughter's concerns about Andreas's condition and her own recognition that despite their divorce, she was the only person who knew him well enough to provide investigators with accurate information about his personality, habits, and vulnerabilities that might be relevant to understanding how he had been targeted by criminals who specialized in exploiting European men through romantic deception. The preliminary toxicological analysis conducted by Dr. Brandt revealed the presence of at least 6 different plant-based compounds that were not found in European flora, suggesting deliberate administration of substances that had been carefully selected for their delayed action properties and their ability to cause progressive tissue death while remaining undetectable through standard medical screening procedures. The origin of these compounds appeared to be West African, though their specific identification would require consultation with experts in traditional African medicine and ethnobotany. The international cooperation that would be required for investigating Andreas's case began with German law enforcement's request for assistance from Senegalese authorities, though the response revealed systematic challenges in investigating crimes that involved traditional practices and criminal networks that operated across multiple countries with different legal systems and investigative capabilities. The complexity of proving deliberate poisoning with exotic substances that were not recognized in European legal systems created unprecedented procedural and evidentiary challenges. The psychological evaluation that Andreas underwent as part of his medical treatment revealed the extensive emotional manipulation that he had experienced during his relationship with Aminata, including techniques designed to create dependency and trust, while providing opportunities for the covert administration of toxic substances. The sophistication of the psychological manipulation suggested professional-level expertise in romantic fraud, combined with traditional knowledge of chemical weapons that could cause delayed but ultimately fatal consequences. The deterioration of Andreas's condition continued despite aggressive medical intervention, as the exotic toxins had caused irreversible damage to his liver, kidneys, and circulatory system that modern European medicine was unable to counteract effectively. The progressive nature of the poisoning meant that, even with immediate treatment, the damage to his organs had reached levels that made survival unlikely without radical, experimental interventions that carried their own substantial risks. The breakthrough in identifying the exotic toxins that were systematically destroying Andreas's body came through collaboration with Professor Amadou Ba of the University of Dakar, a renowned expert in West African traditional medicine whose knowledge of plant-based poisons enabled him to recognize the sophisticated mixture of compounds that had been used against Andreas. Professor Ba's analysis revealed that the toxins were derived from several rare plants native to Senegal and neighboring countries, substances that had been used for centuries in traditional warfare and criminal activities, but were virtually unknown to European medical science. The specific combination of toxins identified in Andreas's system suggested not only extensive knowledge of traditional African medicine, but also modern pharmaceutical understanding of how to create delayed-release delivery systems that would remain dormant for weeks before causing massive organ failure and tissue necrosis. This hybrid approach to poisoning indicated that Andreas had been targeted by criminals who combined ancestral knowledge with contemporary criminal techniques to create weapons that were both untraceable and ultimately fatal. The investigation into Aminata Diop's background revealed that her claimed identity as a successful boutique owner was entirely fabricated, with no legitimate business records or financial documentation supporting her supposed commercial activities in Dakar's fashion industry. The sophisticated nature of her false identity and the resources required to maintain her criminal operation indicated substantial financial backing and organizational support that extended far beyond individual criminal activity. Inspector Mamadou Fall of the Senegalese National Police emerged as the key investigator on the African side of the case, bringing specialized knowledge of criminal networks that operated across West Africa while targeting foreign visitors through sophisticated romance scams combined with traditional poisoning methods. His previous experience with similar cases involving European and American victims provided crucial insights into the operational patterns and international connections of the criminal enterprise that had targeted Andreas. The surveillance operation that Inspector Fall organized to monitor Aminata's activities revealed ongoing criminal behavior that included multiple romantic relationships with foreign men who were visiting Senegal for business or tourism, with evidence suggesting that Andreas was not her first victim and that her criminal network had been operating for years while avoiding detection through the use of traditional poisons that were not recognized by conventional medical or forensic investigation procedures. The pattern of victimization that Inspector Fall identified through his investigation revealed that the criminal network specialized in targeting middle-aged European men who were traveling alone for business purposes, particularly those who appeared emotionally vulnerable due to recent divorces or personal losses that made them susceptible to romantic manipulation and less likely to maintain appropriate caution about intimate relationships with local women they had recently met. The financial investigation that accompanied the criminal inquiry revealed sophisticated money laundering operations that enabled Aminata's network to convert their criminal proceeds into legitimate assets while avoiding detection by banking authorities and law enforcement agencies that might be monitoring unusual financial transactions associated with romance, fraud, or other criminal activities targeting foreign nationals. The medical consultation between Dr. Brandt and traditional African medicine practitioners provided crucial insights into the specific effects and treatment possibilities for the exotic poisons that had been used against Andreas, though the advanced state of his condition and the irreversible damage to his organs made complete recovery impossible, despite the enhanced understanding of his poisoning that the international collaboration had achieved. The diplomatic complications that arose from investigating crimes that involved traditional practices and international criminal networks required careful coordination between German and Senegalese law enforcement agencies, creating challenges that tested existing cooperation agreements, while also highlighting the need for enhanced international protocols for investigating sophisticated crimes that exploited cultural differences and traditional knowledge. The deterioration of Andreas's condition accelerated during the investigation period, as the exotic toxins continued their systematic destruction of his body, despite the aggressive treatment protocols that had been developed through international collaboration between European physicians and African traditional medicine practitioners. The combination of modern medical intervention and traditional antidotes provided some symptomatic relief, but could not reverse the fundamental organ damage that had been caused by months of progressive poisoning. The psychological impact of learning that his romantic encounter in Senegal had been a calculated criminal attack was devastating for Andreas, who struggled to reconcile his positive memories of Aminata with the medical evidence that she had been systematically poisoning him throughout their intimate relationship. The cognitive dissonance between his emotional attachment to their supposed connection and the physical reality of his deteriorating condition created additional trauma that complicated his medical treatment and psychological support. The arrest of Aminata Diop required extensive coordination between German and Senegalese law enforcement agencies, as her location and activities had been carefully concealed through the use of false identities and safe houses that were designed to prevent detection by authorities investigating her criminal network's activities. The operation to apprehend her was complicated by her connections within Senegal's criminal underworld and the need to simultaneously arrest other members of her organization to prevent them from destroying evidence or eliminating potential witnesses who could testify about their systematic targeting of foreign victims. The evidence gathered during the arrest operation revealed the full scope of Aminata's criminal enterprise, including detailed records of multiple victims who had been targeted through romantic manipulation and subsequently poisoned with sophisticated mixtures of traditional African toxins that would cause delayed but ultimately fatal consequences. The systematic nature of the documentation suggested professional-level organization and careful planning that had enabled the network to operate for years while avoiding detection by international law enforcement agencies. The interrogation of Aminata following her arrest revealed a complex personality that combined genuine intelligence and cultural sophistication with complete moral indifference to the suffering she had caused to numerous victims who trusted her with their emotional vulnerability and physical safety. Her explanations for her criminal activities focused on economic necessity and cultural conflict, rather than acknowledging the devastating impact of her actions on the men she had systematically murdered for financial gain. The international legal proceedings required unprecedented cooperation between German and Senegalese judicial systems, as the crimes involved activities that had occurred in both countries while exploiting legal and cultural differences that made prosecution challenging under either nation's individual legal frameworks. The complexity of proving deliberate poisoning with traditional substances that were not recognized in European legal systems created novel procedural challenges that required innovative approaches to evidence presentation and expert testimony. The medical testimony that Dr. Brandt provided during the legal proceedings included detailed forensic analysis of the exotic toxins found in Andreas's system, explaining how traditional African poisons had been combined with modern delivery techniques to create weapons that could defeat conventional medical detection while causing progressive organ failure that would ultimately prove fatal, despite aggressive treatment efforts. The victim impact statement that Sabine Keller provided on behalf of Andreas, who was too ill to participate directly in the legal proceedings, documented the comprehensive destruction that the poisoning had caused not only to his physical health, but also to his emotional well-being and his relationships with family members who had watched helplessly as he deteriorated from a healthy, successful professional into someone who required constant medical care and psychological support. The expert testimony about traditional African medicine that Professor Ba provided helped the court understand the sophisticated knowledge and criminal intent that had been required to select and combine the specific toxins used against Andreas, demonstrating that his poisoning was not the result of accidental exposure or cultural misunderstanding, but rather the calculated implementation of chemical warfare techniques designed to cause maximum suffering while avoiding detection. The evidence of other victims that Inspector Fall's investigation had uncovered revealed that Andreas was part of a much larger pattern of systematic victimization that had affected dozens of European and American men over several years, with criminal proceeds being used to fund the expansion of the network's operations across multiple West African countries, while also providing resources for increasingly sophisticated poisoning techniques and romantic manipulation methods. The psychological evaluation of Aminata that was conducted as part of the legal proceedings revealed personality disorders and moral reasoning deficits that explained her ability to maintain intimate relationships with men she was simultaneously murdering, demonstrating the clinical detachment and manipulative capabilities that had enabled her to cause devastating harm while maintaining the appearance of genuine affection and romantic interest. The international media coverage of the trial brought worldwide attention to the criminal networks operating across West Africa that specialized in targeting Western visitors through sophisticated romance scams combined with traditional poisoning methods, highlighting both the vulnerability of travelers to such schemes and the challenges faced by law enforcement in combating crimes that exploited cultural differences and traditional knowledge. The sentencing phase of the trial focused on determining appropriate punishment that would reflect both the premeditated nature of the murders and the extensive planning that had been required to maintain the criminal enterprise over multiple years while causing devastating harm to numerous victims and their families. The death of Andreas Keller occurred on March 15th, 3 weeks after Aminata's arrest and nearly 2 months after his first symptoms had appeared, marking the end of a courageous battle against exotic poisons that had systematically destroyed his body, while leaving his mind tragically clear to witness every stage of his deterioration. His final days were spent in intensive care at Munich University Hospital, surrounded by medical professionals who had exhausted every conventional and experimental treatment option, while also providing him with the dignity and comfort that his condition allowed. The autopsy conducted by Dr. Brandt confirmed the devastating extent of the damage caused by the traditional African toxins, with tissue samples revealing cellular destruction that was both systematic and irreversible, providing forensic evidence that would be crucial for the ongoing prosecution of Aminata and her criminal associates. The post-mortem examination also revealed additional compounds that had not been detected during Andreas's lifetime, suggesting that the poisoning had been even more sophisticated and comprehensive than initially understood. The international investigation that had been prompted by Andreas's case expanded significantly following his death, as law enforcement agencies across Europe and Africa recognized that his murder was part of a much larger criminal enterprise that posed ongoing threats to Western travelers and business professionals operating in West Africa. The coordination required for investigating and prosecuting crimes that spanned multiple continents created new frameworks for international cooperation, while also highlighting the resources and expertise needed for combating sophisticated criminal networks. The trial proceedings that followed Andreas's death took on additional gravity, as the charges were upgraded to include first-degree murder, with prosecutors arguing that the sophisticated nature of the poisoning and the extended period of suffering it had demonstrated exceptional cruelty and premeditation that deserved the most severe penalties available under both German and Senegalese legal systems. Sabine Keller's transformation from concerned ex-wife to determined advocate for justice reflected the devastating impact that Andreas's murder had on everyone who had known him, as she channeled her grief and anger into ensuring that his death would lead to meaningful changes in how international law enforcement agencies approached crimes involving traditional poisons and romantic manipulation of foreign visitors. The scientific research that grew out of Andreas's case contributed to enhanced understanding of traditional African toxins, while also advancing medical knowledge about treatment approaches for exotic poisoning cases that might affect future victims of similar criminal activities. The collaboration between European medical researchers and African traditional medicine practitioners created new opportunities for cross-cultural scientific cooperation, while also providing practical benefits for potential poison victims. The diplomatic implications of the case extended beyond individual criminal prosecution to include enhanced cooperation agreements between European and African governments, creating frameworks for sharing information about criminal networks, while also supporting economic development and cultural exchange that would reduce the social conditions that enabled such criminal enterprises to flourish. The media attention that Andreas's case attracted brought international awareness to the sophisticated techniques being employed by criminal networks across West Africa, while also educating potential victims about the warning signs of romantic manipulation and the importance of maintaining appropriate caution when forming intimate relationships during international travel for business or personal purposes. The victim advocacy work that emerged from Andreas's case included specialized support services for families affected by international crimes involving exotic poisons or traditional weapons, addressing the unique challenges faced by relatives who must navigate complex legal systems, while also dealing with medical conditions that are not understood by conventional Western medicine. The legislative changes that were prompted by Andreas's case included enhanced penalties for crimes involving traditional poisons or cultural practices that were used for criminal purposes, while also providing increased resources for international cooperation in investigating and prosecuting sophisticated criminal networks that exploited cultural differences to avoid accountability. The ongoing investigation into Aminata's criminal network led to additional arrests and prosecutions across multiple African countries, revealing connections between various criminal organizations that specialized in targeting foreign visitors through different forms of exploitation and violence, demonstrating the need for sustained international cooperation in combating such sophisticated criminal enterprises. The conviction of Aminata Diop and 7 members of her criminal network represented a landmark achievement in international cooperation for prosecuting crimes that involve traditional weapons and cross-cultural criminal activities, though the sentences imposed reflected the challenges of determining appropriate punishment for crimes that were unprecedented in both German and Senegalese legal systems. Aminata received life imprisonment without possibility of parole, while her associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years, depending on their roles in the systematic murder of foreign victims. The asset forfeiture proceedings that followed the criminal convictions revealed the substantial profits that the network had generated through their systematic targeting of wealthy European and American men, with proceeds from their crimes having been invested in legitimate businesses and real estate across multiple countries in ways that made complete recovery difficult, despite the best efforts of international law enforcement and financial investigators. The international law enforcement cooperation that had been essential for investigating and prosecuting Andreas's case continued through ongoing efforts to identify and apprehend other members of the criminal network who had escaped initial arrest operations, while also working to prevent similar organizations from establishing operations in other regions where they might target vulnerable foreign travelers and business professionals. The medical advances that resulted from the research prompted by Andreas's case included the development of rapid diagnostic tests for traditional African toxins, potentially saving lives of future victims who might otherwise be misdiagnosed or receive inappropriate treatment that could delay life-saving interventions. The collaboration between European toxicologists and African traditional medicine practitioners created new understanding of natural compounds that had both criminal and legitimate medical applications. The victim support services that were established in response to Andreas's case provided specialized assistance for families affected by international crimes involving exotic weapons or traditional practices, addressing the unique challenges faced by relatives who must navigate complex legal systems, while also dealing with medical conditions that are not recognized by conventional Western medicine and insurance systems. The diplomatic agreements that were negotiated as a result of Andreas's case created permanent frameworks for cooperation between European and African law enforcement agencies, establishing protocols for information sharing and joint investigations that would improve responses to future cases involving criminal networks that operated across international boundaries while exploiting cultural and legal differences. The academic research that was inspired by Andreas's case contributed to enhanced understanding of how traditional knowledge could be perverted for criminal purposes, while also advancing legitimate scientific inquiry into natural compounds that might have therapeutic applications, creating new opportunities for beneficial research, while also helping prevent the criminal exploitation of cultural practices. The corporate security consulting industry that emerged in response to Andreas's case provided specialized services for companies and organizations that sent employees to regions where they might be vulnerable to sophisticated criminal targeting, including risk assessment protocols and security training that address the specific techniques used by romantic manipulation networks. The insurance industry's response to Andreas's case included enhanced coverage for victims of exotic poisoning and international crime, while also implementing improved risk assessment procedures for travelers visiting regions where traditional criminal networks might pose threats to foreign visitors and business professionals. The legislative initiatives that were supported by victim advocates and international law enforcement included enhanced penalties for crimes involving cultural practices or traditional weapons, improved resources for victims of international crime, and strengthened cooperation agreements that would facilitate investigation and prosecution of sophisticated criminal networks operating across multiple jurisdictions. The ongoing monitoring of similar criminal activities revealed that while Aminata's specific network had been successfully prosecuted, other organizations continued to operate using similar techniques while adapting their methods to avoid the detection strategies that had led to her capture, highlighting the need for continued vigilance and international cooperation in combating such sophisticated criminal enterprises. The establishment of the Andreas Keller Memorial Foundation represented Sabine's transformation from grieving ex-wife to international advocate for victims of exotic poisoning and romantic manipulation crimes, creating a permanent institution dedicated to supporting affected families, while also funding research and prevention programs that address the sophisticated techniques used by criminal networks to exploit vulnerable travelers and business professionals. The International Conference on Traditional Weapons and Criminal Exploitation that the Foundation sponsored annually brought together law enforcement officials, medical researchers, traditional medicine practitioners, and victim advocates from around the world to share knowledge about criminal techniques, while also developing more effective prevention and prosecution strategies that respected cultural practices while combating their criminal exploitation. The research initiatives that the Foundation funded contributed to enhanced understanding of traditional African toxins, while also advancing development of antidotes and treatment protocols that could save lives of future victims, with findings being shared freely with medical professionals and law enforcement agencies worldwide to maximize their protective benefits for potential victims. The training programs that were developed for law enforcement agencies included specialized techniques for investigating crimes involving traditional poisons and cultural practices, while also providing officers with understanding of the psychological manipulation techniques used by criminals to exploit emotional vulnerability in their victims. The victim support network that grew out of the Foundation's work provided ongoing assistance for families affected by similar crimes, while also maintaining advocacy pressure for continued improvements in international cooperation and victim protection services that address the unique challenges posed by crimes involving traditional weapons and cross-cultural criminal activities. The medical research collaborations that the Foundation established between European institutions and African traditional medicine practitioners created new opportunities for beneficial scientific cooperation, while also improving understanding of natural compounds that had both criminal and therapeutic applications, contributing to advances in both toxicology and pharmaceutical development. The diplomatic initiatives that the Foundation supported included enhanced cooperation agreements between Western and African governments, creating frameworks for information sharing and joint investigations that would improve protection for international travelers, while also supporting economic development and cultural exchange that reduced social conditions enabling criminal networks to flourish. The educational materials that the Foundation produced provided practical information about recognizing romance scams and understanding cultural contexts that might make travelers vulnerable to criminal exploitation, while also raising awareness about the sophisticated techniques used by international criminal networks to target victims based on their emotional vulnerabilities and professional circumstances. The corporate partnerships that the Foundation developed with international businesses and travel organizations created systematic approaches to traveler safety and risk awareness, providing specialized training and support services that help protect employees and clients who might encounter sophisticated criminal networks during international business or leisure travel. The psychological research that the Foundation supported contributed to enhanced understanding of how romantic manipulation techniques were used to exploit emotional vulnerability, while also advancing knowledge about effective treatment, approaches for victims of systematic deception and criminal exploitation who required specialized therapeutic interventions. The legislative advocacy that the foundation undertook included support for enhanced international cooperation agreements, improved victim protection services, and strengthened penalties for crimes that exploited cultural practices or traditional knowledge for criminal purposes, creating legal frameworks that balanced respect for cultural heritage with protection against criminal exploitation. The 10-year anniversary of Andreas Keller's death marked a significant milestone in international efforts to combat criminal networks that exploited traditional knowledge and romantic manipulation to target foreign victims, with the Andreas Keller Memorial Foundation having become a recognized leader in victim advocacy, research funding, and international cooperation that had contributed to meaningful improvements in law enforcement responses and victim protection protocols. The medical advances that had resulted from research funded by the foundation included standardized treatment protocols for exotic poisoning cases and rapid diagnostic tests that could identify traditional African toxins in emergency medical settings, potentially saving lives of victims who might otherwise receive inappropriate treatment or delayed intervention that could prove fatal. The international law enforcement cooperation that had been essential for investigating Andreas's case had evolved into permanent frameworks for combating criminal networks that exploited cultural practices and traditional knowledge, with specialized units in multiple countries working together to identify and prosecute sophisticated criminals who targeted foreign visitors through romantic manipulation and traditional weapons. The victim support services that had been enhanced in response to Andreas's case continued to provide specialized assistance for families affected by international crimes involving exotic weapons or cultural exploitation, addressing the unique challenges faced by victims and their relatives who must navigate complex legal and medical systems while processing the trauma of sophisticated criminal victimization. The diplomatic agreements that had been negotiated as a result of Andreas's case continued to facilitate cooperation between Western and African governments, while also supporting economic development and cultural exchange programs that addressed the social conditions that enabled criminal networks to recruit members and establish operations in vulnerable communities. The academic research that had been inspired by Andreas's case continued to advance understanding of traditional toxins and their medical applications, while also contributing to enhanced knowledge about the psychological techniques used in romantic manipulation and the cultural context that made certain individuals vulnerable to criminal exploitation by sophisticated international networks. The corporate security industry that had emerged in response to Andreas's case provided ongoing services for businesses and organizations that sent employees to regions where they might encounter sophisticated criminal targeting, with risk assessment protocols and security training that evolved continuously to address new criminal techniques and operational methods. The insurance industry's response to Andreas's case had led to enhanced coverage options for victims of exotic poisoning and international crime, while also implementing improved risk assessment procedures and prevention programs that helped protect travelers from becoming victims of sophisticated criminal schemes. The legislative changes that had been prompted by Andreas's advocacy included enhanced penalties for crimes involving cultural exploitation and traditional weapons, improved resources for international cooperation in criminal investigations, and strengthened victim protection services that address the unique needs of individuals affected by cross-cultural criminal activities. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that while specific organizations like Aminata's had been successfully prosecuted, similar criminal enterprises continued to evolve and adapt their techniques to exploit new technologies and social platforms, while also incorporating traditional methods that remain difficult for conventional law enforcement to detect and counter. The psychological treatment protocols that had been developed through foundation-funded research provided specialized approaches for helping victims recover from romantic manipulation and exotic poisoning, while also addressing the cultural and medical complexities that made conventional therapeutic interventions insufficient for addressing the unique trauma experienced by victims of such sophisticated criminal schemes. The transformation of Sabine Keller from victims advocate to internationally recognized expert in cross-cultural crime prevention represented the positive legacy that had emerged from the tragedy of Andreas's death, as she channeled her grief and determination into meaningful work that protected other potential victims. while also honoring her ex-husband's memory through practical crime prevention and victim support efforts. The research network that the foundation had established continued to generate valuable insights about traditional toxins and their medical applications, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of criminal techniques and prevention strategies, with findings being shared freely with medical professionals, law enforcement agencies, and potential victims worldwide to maximize protective benefits. The international cooperation frameworks that had been developed in response to Andreas's case provided models for investigating other types of sophisticated crime that exploited cultural differences and traditional knowledge, demonstrating that effective prosecution of complex international crimes was possible when governments committed to meaningful cooperation and resource sharing. The victim advocacy movement that had grown out of Andreas's case included specialized support services and legislative initiatives that continued to improve protection for individuals and families affected by international crime, while also maintaining pressure for continued enhancements in law enforcement cooperation and criminal justice responses to sophisticated criminal networks. The educational impact of Andreas's story extended far beyond formal prevention programs to include widespread public awareness about the dangers of romantic manipulation and traditional weapons being used by criminal networks, contributing to increased vigilance among potential victims, while also supporting broader understanding of cultural exploitation and international crime. The medical community's enhanced understanding of traditional African toxins and their treatment had saved numerous lives through improved diagnostic capabilities and therapeutic interventions, while also contributing to broader scientific knowledge about natural compounds that had both criminal and beneficial applications in modern medicine and pharmaceutical development. The corporate security consulting industry continued to provide valuable services for businesses and organizations operating in regions where criminal networks might target their employees or clients, with evolving risk assessment protocols and prevention strategies that reflected ongoing research and intelligence about criminal techniques and operational methods. The diplomatic relationships that had been strengthened through investigation and prosecution of Andreas's case continued to facilitate beneficial cooperation between Western and African nations, while also supporting economic development and cultural exchange programs that addressed root causes of criminal network recruitment and operations. The psychological research that had been prompted by Andreas's case contributed to enhanced understanding of trauma recovery for victims of sophisticated manipulation and exotic poisoning, while also advancing knowledge about prevention strategies that could help potential victims recognize and avoid criminal targeting before becoming victimized. The legislative and policy changes that had resulted from Andreas's advocacy continued to influence international cooperation and victim protection efforts, while also providing models for other jurisdictions seeking to enhance their capabilities for investigating and prosecuting sophisticated international crimes that exploited cultural practices and traditional knowledge. The ongoing impact of Andreas's case demonstrated that individual tragedies could be transformed into lasting positive change through sustained advocacy and international cooperation, creating protective systems and knowledge resources that would benefit future generations of travelers and business professionals who might encounter similar criminal threats. 15 years after Andreas Keller's death from exotic poisoning administered by a sophisticated criminal network in Senegal, his tragic story continues to serve as both a warning about the deadly techniques employed by international criminal organizations and an inspiration for the comprehensive response that can emerge when individual tragedy is channeled into sustained advocacy for victim protection and international cooperation. The Andreas Keller Memorial Foundation has become a globally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 600 families, while also funding research and prevention programs that have contributed to systematic improvements in law enforcement capabilities and medical treatment protocols. The medical advances that resulted from research inspired by Andreas's case have revolutionized emergency medicine's approach to exotic poisoning, with diagnostic tests and treatment protocols now standard practice in hospitals worldwide, enabling rapid identification and intervention that has saved dozens of lives when victims of traditional toxins received appropriate medical care instead of being misdiagnosed with conventional illnesses. The international law enforcement cooperation that was essential for investigating Andreas's murder has evolved into permanent frameworks for combating sophisticated criminal networks that exploit cultural practices and traditional knowledge, with specialized units in multiple countries sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that have disrupted numerous criminal organizations and prevented countless potential victims from being targeted. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to Andreas's case continue to provide specialized assistance for individuals and families affected by international crime involving exotic weapons or cultural exploitation, addressing the unique medical, legal, and psychological challenges that conventional support systems are not equipped to handle effectively. The research collaborations between European medical institutions and African traditional medicine practitioners that grew out of Andreas's case have created new opportunities for beneficial scientific cooperation, while also advancing understanding of natural compounds that have both criminal and therapeutic applications, contributing to pharmaceutical development and toxicology knowledge that benefits global medical practice. Sabine Keller's transformation from victim advocate to international expert in cross-cultural crime prevention has provided a model for how personal tragedy can be channeled into professional expertise that protects others, while also contributing to meaningful social change through sustained advocacy and educational efforts that raise awareness about sophisticated criminal techniques. The diplomatic agreements that were negotiated as a result of Andreas's case continue to facilitate cooperation between Western and African governments, while also supporting economic development and cultural exchange programs that address the social conditions enabling criminal networks to operate, creating positive alternatives to criminal activity while maintaining respect for cultural practices and traditional knowledge. The corporate security industry that emerged in response to Andreas's case provides ongoing protection for businesses and organizations operating internationally, with risk assessment protocols and prevention strategies that have evolved continuously to address new criminal techniques while also supporting legitimate economic development and cultural exchange. The insurance industry's enhanced coverage options for victims of exotic poisoning and international crime continue to provide crucial support for affected families, while also incentivizing prevention efforts and risk mitigation strategies that help protect potential victims from becoming targets of sophisticated criminal networks. The legislative changes that Andreas's advocacy helped achieve have strengthened international cooperation in criminal investigations, while also enhancing victim protection services and providing meaningful penalties for crimes that exploit cultural practices or traditional knowledge for criminal purposes, creating legal frameworks that balance cultural respect with victim protection. The educational materials and awareness campaigns that the Foundation has produced continue to provide valuable information about recognizing romantic manipulation and understanding cultural contexts that might make travelers vulnerable to criminal exploitation, contributing to prevention efforts that help potential victims avoid dangerous situations. The academic research that has grown out of Andreas's case continues to advance understanding of traditional toxins, criminal manipulation techniques, and cross-cultural crime patterns, while also training new generations of researchers, law enforcement professionals, and medical practitioners who will continue improving responses to sophisticated international criminal activities. The psychological treatment protocols that were developed through Foundation research provide specialized approaches for helping victims recover from romantic manipulation and exotic poisoning, while also addressing the cultural and medical complexities that make conventional therapeutic interventions insufficient for such unique forms of criminal victimization. The story of Andreas Keller serves as a permanent reminder that the pursuit of professional success and personal fulfillment through international travel, while enriching and valuable, must be balanced with awareness of the sophisticated predators who exploit normal human desires for connection and adventure to facilitate devastating crimes using traditional knowledge and modern manipulation techniques. His legacy lives on through the hundreds of lives that have been saved by medical advances prompted by his case, the thousands of potential victims who have been protected by enhanced awareness and prevention programs, and the systematic improvements in international law enforcement cooperation that continue to disrupt criminal networks before they can claim additional victims. The ongoing impact of Andreas's case extends beyond individual protection to include enhanced understanding of how traditional knowledge can be exploited for criminal purposes while also contributing to legitimate scientific and medical advances that benefit global health and safety. His story demonstrates that even the most tragic circumstances can be transformed into lasting positive change through sustained advocacy, international cooperation, and commitment to preventing others from experiencing similar victimization. The continued evolution of criminal networks that exploit traditional knowledge and romantic manipulation techniques highlights the ongoing relevance of the prevention strategies and international cooperation frameworks that were developed in response to Andreas's case, ensuring that his death contributed to protective systems that will continue benefiting future generations of travelers and professionals who might otherwise become targets of sophisticated criminal exploitation. Andreas Keller's story serves as a permanent reminder that the pursuit of professional achievement and personal connection through international travel and cultural exchange, while valuable and enriching, must be balanced with appropriate awareness of the sophisticated predators who exploit normal human desires and cultural curiosity to facilitate devastating crimes that combine ancient knowledge with modern manipulation techniques to create weapons that can defeat even careful and intelligent victims.